Back to the channel. Today we're going to unravel some incredibly complex events in Genoa. Rumors are circulating around the Newman family, but what's the truth? In this video, I'll summarize the plot points that will be revealed in the next episode. Stay tuned to see what happens. Welcome back to our channel, your premier destination for the most explosive and heart-wrenching updates from the dramatic world of Genoa City. Today is a truly phenomenal day to dive deep into the latest labyrinthine twists and turns of your favorite daytime drama. Grab a warm cup of coffee and settle in, because the shocking revelations we have for you today will leave you absolutely breathless and begging for more. Let us get right into the heart-pounding drama that is currently shaking the very foundations of our beloved city. The fundamental landscape of Genoa City is trembling violently today as a catastrophic, blood-soaked event threatens to alter the destinies of the Abbott and Newman dynasties forever. We begin with a scene of unimaginable horror, a terrifying nightmare that no one, not even the most calculating minds in town, could have possibly anticipated. The heavily fortified, secretive compound of Dr. Lawrence Markham has just become the stage for a tragedy of epic proportions. Kyle Abbott's desperate, solitary infiltration to rescue his captive mother has devolved into absolute chaos, culminating in a violent confrontation that has left the entire town reeling in shock. But what happens when the ultimate manipulator makes the ultimate selfless sacrifice? To truly understand the gravity of this moment, we must delve deep into the complex psychology of Diane Jenkins. For decades, Diane has been renowned as the master manipulator, the cunning woman who famously faked her own death and played dangerous games with the hearts of powerful men like Jack Abbott and Victor Newman. Yet, in the suffocating, terrifying darkness of Dr. Markham's home, stripped of all her elaborate schemes, financial leverage, and deceptive masks, Diane was suddenly reduced to her most primal, vulnerable instinct. She was no longer a corporate schemer. She was simply a mother witnessing her beloved son being brutally overpowered by a sadistic captor. Could this raw, primal display of maternal instinct be the very thing that ultimately cost Diane her life? The physical altercation inside the compound was nothing short of a brutal, adrenaline-fueled nightmare. Kyle Abbott, driven by a frantic, blinding need to save his mother from the sinister clutches of Patty Williams and the predatory doctor, Markham had blindly charged into a highly sophisticated trap. As the walls literally and metaphorically closed in, Markham's sinister grip tightened around Kyle, preparing to neutralize the young Abbott heir once and for all. Seeing her son on the verge of being permanently incapacitated or worse, Diane Jenkins shattered her own paralyzing fear. With zero regard for her own safety, she threw her body directly into the violent fray, intercepting a lethal blow meant for Kyle. How could a simple, desperate rescue mission devolve into a blood-soaked tragedy so quickly? The immediate aftermath of the fatal blow was a visceral, heart-stopping tableau of absolute despair. Diane collapsed heavily to the cold, unforgiving floor, her life force rapidly draining away as a horrifying pool of crimson spread beneath her. Kyle's agonizing, guttural screams echoed through the sterile halls of the compound as he frantically ripped himself free from his captors to catch his falling mother. The sheer tragic irony of the moment is utterly staggering. The woman who spent her entire adult life orchestrating elaborate, victimless illusions is now bleeding out in a brutally real, unscripted tragedy. Will Kyle ever be able to wash the metaphorical and literal blood from his trembling hands after leading his mother into this deadly ambush? The chaotic, frantic rush to Genoa City Memorial Hospital was a blur of wailing sirens and suffocating panic. The Abbott family, recently fractured by Jack's manipulative audio recordings and his misguided, disastrous attempts to play psychological warfare with the unhinged Patty Williams, was suddenly thrust into a horrifying reality check. Tracy, Jack, and Summer arrived at the emergency room doors, their historical grievances and petty squabbles rendered utterly meaningless in the face of Diane's fading pulse. Jack Abbott, who had just been contemplating a fake romance with Nikki Newman, to spark Diane's jealousy, now stared at his hands in absolute horror, realizing his actions may have indirectly caused his wife's demise. Can the fractured Abbott dynasty possibly survive this unprecedented, life-shattering trauma? Inside the sterile, blindingly bright trauma bay of the emergency room, the medical staff faced an unprecedented, ticking time bomb of a crisis. Diane's internal injuries were deemed catastrophic, requiring immediate, highly specialized surgical intervention to repair the massive, life-threatening internal hemorrhaging. The attending physicians frantically consulted charts and scans, realizing that standard emergency procedures would not be enough to pull the Abbott matriarch back from the brink of death. The hospital administration scrambled, realizing that losing a high-profile figure like Diane Jenkins Abbott on their operating table would be a public relations and medical disaster. Who in all of Genoa City possesses the extraordinary, specialized surgical skill required to pull Diane back from the terrifying abyss? Enter Dr. Nate Hastings, a man whose own medical history is fraught with profound trauma and miraculous redemption. Nate has recently experienced a triumphant return to the medical field as a top-tier diagnostician, famously discovering the microscopic, hidden complication in Nikki Newman's optic nerve that every other specialist had missed. However, acting as a brilliant diagnostician is one thing. Physically holding a scalpel with a hand that suffered severe, career-ending nerve damage is an entirely different, terrifying reality. The brutal punch delivered by Devin Winters years ago had supposedly ended Nate's surgical career forever, leaving him with a permanent tremor and a shattered professional identity. Is Nate truly ready to hold the delicate, fraying thread of a woman's life in his permanently compromised hands? The ethical and professional dilemma currently paralyzing Nate is immense and suffocating. If he steps into that operating room and his hand betrays him for even a microsecond, he will not only be directly responsible for the gruesome death of Diane Jenkins Abbott, but he will also face a catastrophic, career-ending malpractice lawsuit. The Abbott family's immense wealth and influence mean that any surgical failure would be scrutinized under a merciless global microscope. Nate has worked tirelessly to rebuild his reputation, pivoting from a failed corporate stint at Chancellor Winters back to his true calling of healing, and this single operation could obliterate all of his hard-won progress. Will this agonizing decision be the ultimate redemption for Nate Hastings, or the final, devastating nail in his professional coffin? Adding an unbearable layer of tension to Nate's internal war is the intense psychological pressure being applied by Dr. Stephanie Simmons. Stephanie, a woman currently harboring her own dark, explosive secrets regarding her son Holden and the late Neil Winters, corners Nate in the chaotic hospital corridor. She refuses to accept his hesitation, delivering a chilling, uncompromising ultimatum that challenges the very core of his medical oath. Stephanie insists that Nate is the only surgeon in the building with the anatomical knowledge required to navigate Diane's specific complex injuries. She relentlessly pushes his buttons, forcing him to confront his deepest insecurities and demanding that he stop hiding behind his past trauma. Will Nate succumb to Stephanie's intense psychological warfare, or will he walk away to protect his fragile peace of mind? The agonizing decision hangs in the air like a thick, suffocating fog. Nate looks through the glass windows of the waiting room, observing the shattered, weeping remains of the Abbott family. He sees Jack, a man completely broken by his own recent arrogant failures, and Kyle, sobbing uncontrollably with his mother's fresh blood still staining his torn clothes. The sheer desperation in their eyes pierces through Nate's defensive armor, reminding him of the sacred oath he took to save lives, regardless of the personal cost. With a heavy heart and a mind racing with terrifying possibilities, Nate slowly nods his head, agreeing to scrub in and risk his entire medical license on a nearly impossible procedure. Can Nate push past the terrifying ghosts of his own medical failures to perform an absolute miracle? The atmosphere inside the operating room is thick, with an unbearable electric tension as the surgery begins. Nate scrubs in, staring intensely at his trembling fingers under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights. The ghosts of his past surgical failures and the violent, life-altering altercation with Devin Winters flash before his eyes in a dizzying montage. He takes a deep, ragged breath, forces his mind into a state of clinical detachment, and makes the first critical incision into Diane's battered body. The surgical team watches with bated breath, fully aware of Nate's history and the astronomical stakes of this specific operation. Can a surgeon with a history of severe nerve damage execute the flawless, millimeter-precise maneuvers required to save her? Just as Nate begins to navigate the most delicate, treacherous phase of the procedure, the ultimate nightmare unfolds. Diane's vitals suddenly plummet into the danger zone, and the heart monitors erupt into a deafening, frantic alarm that shatters the focused silence of the room. A massive, unforeseen internal bleed obscures Nate's surgical field, requiring him to act with superhuman speed and absolute, unwavering precision. His damaged hand cramps, a terrifying spasm of pain shooting up his arm as the pressure reaches an agonizing crescendo. The sheer terror of the surgical team is palpable as they wait for Nate's next move. Will Nate's desperate, split-second medical interventions be enough to stabilize the catastrophic internal bleeding before Diane slips away forever? Outside the surgical theater, the agonizing wait for the Abbott family stretches into an unbearable, torturous eternity. Jack and Kyle pace the pristine floors. Their historical grievances, recent betrayals, and corporate ambitions rendered utterly meaningless in the face of imminent death. Jack is consumed by a toxic, suffocating wave of guilt, realizing that his arrogant decision to provoke Patty Williams and play dangerous mind games directly led to Kyle's capture and Diane's subsequent sacrifice. The cruel irony that Patty's deranged obsession has resulted in Diane fighting for her life on an operating table is not lost on anyone in the waiting room. Will Jack's overwhelming guilt over provoking Patty Williams consume his soul before he even gets the chance to say a final goodbye to his wife? The climax of this harrowing ordeal arrives when the heavy doors of the operating room finally swing open, revealing a physically drained and emotionally exhausted Nate Hastings. He slowly approaches the frantic Abbott family, his face a